It's only a small Surrey village near Camberley, but the name Deepcut has sadly become synonymous with a series of deaths at the barracks there. 4 young trainees died by gunshot wounds over a number of years in the late 90s and early 2000s. The strange but similar circumstances made the families deeply sceptical of initial suggestions of death by suicide. After perseverance by those families, subsequent reviews exposed a culture of bullying and harassment at the barracks and found fault in the Army's treatment of trainees. Questions were raised about the investigations into the deaths, and today one family successfully won a High Court action to obtain a fresh inquest into the death of their son. Private Jeff Gray was only 17 when he died 16 years ago. Joining me now from Salford is Pete Weatherby QC, a specialist in public inquiries and inquests, including Hillsborough, Grenfell and a whole raft of others. And a very good evening to you.
Hi.
We've had a string of cases that go back decades. There could be blood contamination, Hillsborough, Orgreave, cases where families of those involved in some ghastly tragedy feel justice hasn't been done or questions have been left unanswered. Do you see commonalities in all of these?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, as you just reported with the Deepcut cases, these poor families have got to go through the whole process yet again to try and get at the truth. And not just one family, it's not a coincidence. There's three of them, as you just reported. You mentioned blood contamination. I could add to that the Birmingham pub bombings,
Yeah.
the new inquests in those are 45 years on. In my view, there are two real common problems. The first is a duty of there's the candour. There needs to be a duty, a legal duty of candour. What is a common part of all of these cases, and apparently the Deepcut ones as well, is that there is new evidence coming forward. Well, why is there new evidence coming forward so long after 15 years after the original inquests? What went wrong with the original investigations, the original inquiries? What went wrong with them? It appears, given all of these historic cases, take the blood contamination case, go back to the early 1980s, when the evidence seems to show that the Department of Health knew that the blood was contaminated, yet was still supplying people unknowingly, who then went on to die from either hepatitis or HIV.
But your point is, in these cases, there's a culture of denial in
Yes,
public authorities, as there would be in any authority when they're investigated and they're...
Well, there shouldn't be.
Yeah.
There's a culture of denial. There's institutional defensiveness where they reach for the denial first. I mean, if you look at Grenfell, let's bring this right up to date. You look at Grenfell, immediately after the fire, you had the council saying that they'd done nothing wrong in the emergency response. You had some of the contractors issuing condolences, but at the end of them they were saying, by the way, we did nothing wrong either. And people are making their denials before they've even looked at their own behaviour. And there's a reason for that.
The other feature, of course, is, and we heard it in the piece there, everybody's very, very well legally represented, apart from the families of the victims.
Well, exactly. I mean, in any of these disasters or any of these tragedies, that's exactly right. The army, the police, the local authorities, the NHS, whatever it is, all entirely properly fully represented, but the victims are not. If you look at the Birmingham pub bombings, the families after 45 years are spending most of their time trying to get funding so they can go to the inquest of their loved ones.
Is there a point that sometimes it is right to say it's time to close this issue, we're not going to have an inquiry? Maybe the families are clinging on to hopes that are unrealistic about what might emerge from an inquiry, or maybe the authorities genuinely know that there's nothing to be said. Or, I mean, is there ever a defence when a family wants an inquiry just to say, I'm sorry, it's time up?
Well, I'd look at it the other end of the telescope. I would say that there should be an inquiry very quickly, and it should be done properly, and you can do that if there's a legal duty of candour which makes the public authority or the public-facing private entity in these days of privatisation, if there's a legal duty on them to be proactive in coming out with the truth and owning up to their own shortcomings.
And this is your proposed law. Sorry to rush you, but
yes,
the Hillsborough law,
well,
which is effectively a proposal with quite a bit of cross-party support, as I understand.
Well, it's got very, very strong cross-party support. It's had its first reading. It will go back into the House of Commons sometime soon, I hope. And that's what it does. It requires candour, so hopefully we won't have these repeat inquests 15 years on if people proactively have to tell the truth. And it will put victims on a level playing field in terms of representation, because it will link public funding to public authorities to public funding to victims in disasters and unnatural death situations.
We'll see how that bill gets on. Pete Weatherby, thanks very much indeed. Thanks.
Thank you very much.